Hello, hello. Today's story is the second adventure of Skyler and Nick. You might want to listen to the first one, and they are both written by A Mysterious Lurker. It was 2 weeks until Nick contacted me again about a second case. Even with my savings account looking pretty nice from all the extra jobs I was pulling, I still got excited about seeing his number come up on my phone. Nicholas Flint was a government agent that killed supernatural creatures. He wasn't human, but besides his unnatural hair color and blank stare, he didn't appear too strange. His monotone voice was the oddest thing about him, as it made his intentions difficult to understand, but overall, he was easy to get along with. I worked as a pretty novice P.I, and I doubted my skills would be of use to him. Turns out, just being human helped in some occasions. I wished he would have contacted me sooner. Still, getting an extra job through him helped a lot. I may be risking my life every time I accepted, but it was well worth it. This time, we met in my office instead of my car. He brought along a case folder, and I was surprised a secret government agent dealing with supernatural creatures used mundane things like case folders. I offered him some coffee, which he turned down, so we got straight to the case. There have been several missing homeless men recently. Some bodies have turned up torn to pieces, and we cannot place what kind of creature would do such damage. Also, it's difficult to determine which homeless men are victims or have just left the area for different reasons. Nick explained as he started to arrange the photos on my desk. Each photo was fairly gruesome. I wanted to be a cop, but in the end was unable to do so. I looked up things like this for my own preparation for the job I'd never gotten, but my stomach still twisted at the sight. Each person was taken apart in different ways and then just left in wooden areas to be found or eaten by animals. Some scavengers got at them, making it difficult to find the original damage in the bodies due to it being eaten away. I sat looking over each photo, wondering why Nicky asked me to help him. I don't know a thing about supernatural creatures. I didn't even know they were real until recently. I also wasn't a bite mark expert and couldn't tell him what had been munching on these bodies in the woods. I'll do my best to help, but I don't exactly have the resources to be of much use, I admitted after I placed a photo back down on my desk. I would definitely be skipping lunch that day. This case is very low on the list of priorities. I currently do not have a partner, and my supervisors will not let me in the field without one. Unless I have someone working with me, I cannot look into this case, and no one else is interested, he explained as he started to clean off my desk of the files. So, just me being around is helpful? I asked with arms crossed. Exactly, he said with a small nod. I didn't know how I felt about that. It didn't help my self-esteem in the slightest, knowing I was just there to look pretty. In fact, Nick could have gotten anyone else to fill in for his partner. I was the only one free and willing to do a case no one but him cared about. How does your job even work? Does your boss give you cases to solve? How come you can just pick the ones you want? I asked, wondering about his work. I knew less about Nick than I did about supernatural creatures. At times, I'm assigned to jobs that are suited to my skill set. If none comes up, I am able to pick from any open cases within reason. There are some creatures out there far too powerful for certain agents to confront. I am the only one interested in closing smaller cases. If I hadn't taken the witch case, or been interested in this one, they would have been passed along to the hunters, Nick said, and his voice was making me a little sleepy despite the information being interesting. The what? I asked, confused. Hunters are a human-run organization with the main goal to kill every supernatural creature. They may use magic to fight, but refuse to work with creatures of the night. The corporation I work for mostly uses supernatural agents. We tolerate each other to get cases solved. I would never have assumed there was more than one agency dealing with things that lurked in the night. It made sense. After nearly getting killed by the witch, I understood how some people could hate anything like that. If Nick wasn't as easygoing as he was, I would have had a bad view on supernatural creatures as a whole. That witch was evil, but Nikki was so non-threatening it made me think there were good creatures out there. Whatever was killing the homeless men in this current case was giving creatures a bad rep. I wondered just how often things like this happened, and how it was possible for it to be mostly unnoticed. Alright, let's get started. If we solve this quickly, we can finish some other backlog cases for you. I stood up with my car keys in hand. I was the only employee in my small PI company, so I didn't need to tell everyone I was leaving the office for the day. Nearly all of my jobs came through email, and the rest were direct to my cell phone. I didn't need an office, but it made me seem more official, and I found clients felt more comfortable meeting in one as needed. I locked up wondering when I would be back, and how dangerous this job would turn out. We drove a city away, and Nick directed me to a local park near the downtown area. I could already see signs of a homeless population that only got worse as we got closer to the main street. There was a men's shelter right next to the park, with about 5 people hanging out in front of the front steps. I followed Nick towards the building, unsure of what our first task would be. Because he was wearing a suit, he looked pretty official. No one really bothered us as we walked past the huddle of people. A smell drifted out from the small crowd, and I forced myself not to react. Trash littered some of the stone stairs, and I hoped I didn't step on anything too unpleasant. Inside the building, it smelled of harsh cleaning chemicals and unwashed bodies. A tired-looking receptionist looked at us warily, not wanting the trouble a man in a suit would bring. After showing her his badge and introducing himself, Nick brought out some photos but didn't offer them to her just yet. "I'm sorry to bother you, miss, but recently we have found some deceased men. 5 have been from this area, but the other 3 have yet to be identified. If you are willing, would you look at these photos and see if you recognize any of them?" Nick asked in an official tone. I stood back watching the exchange. The receptionist looked as if this wasn't her first time dealing with something like this. She didn't even look surprised when asked to look at photos of the dead.
"Do you have a warrant? For privacy reasons, we cannot give out the names of the men who stay here,"
she replied stiffly. "I do not have a warrant for your list of names. You may contact the local police department to confirm my identity and the fact that I am working on this case. I can come back with one, however, but I wish to have the names of these men as fast as possible," Nick admitted, his voice still without emotion.
"Why? These men don't really have anyone looking for them. I've never heard of a cop wanting to deal with people that stay here, let alone care about their names,"
she replied in a worn-out tone. She wasn't trying to be cruel, just stating some facts. It was her words that finally made me realize we were the only ones looking for what killed these men. I looked around the small entrance, seeing chairs that looked older than myself bolted down to the floor. The building was barely staying together. The small amount of people who cared about the homeless in that city worked with nearly no resources or help. I imagine this was a common sight across the country. I looked back over when Nick responded to the woman. "I don't like the name John Doe. I hate seeing it on 3 photos," he admitted while glancing at the paper in his hands. We all remained silent for a few heavy seconds. Finally, the receptionist held out her hand to look over the photos. She stared at them for a while, trying to place the faces. After some very careful consideration, she wrote down some names on the back of each paper.
"I've never seen them this cleaned up, so I'm not too sure about the 3rd one, but I'm fairly certain this is who these men are. I haven't seen them for a while and hope they didn't turn out like this. If I give you some other names, could you check on the ones that also haven't been in for a while? There could be all sorts of reasons why, but..."
She trailed off, looking a bit worried about keeping her job after giving us information, but knowing it was worth it in the end. Nick nodded and took a few more minutes getting some names, descriptions, and common hangout spots to keep an eye on. He thanked the older woman after everything was collected. He sounded insincere, but that was just because of his odd tone of voice. I could tell he truly respected the receptionist for helping out. We said thank you again before heading out. Hey, is having their names going to help us figure out what kind of monster killed them? I asked once we walked down the stairs and got out of earshot of the crowd that had gotten larger since we were inside. No, the names add nothing to this case. My job is to only find and kill the creatures causing trouble. We leave the rest to the police. But getting the location of where they normally stay around helps. We can scout out those areas and ask around for some more information. He really didn't need to come by the shelter asking for local homeless hangouts. Just driving around was enough to find a few. We could easily ask any of those people about other spots. This trip was really about trying to find out who these men were. I paused at my car door, looking over at Nick and wondering about him. I didn't understand how someone who lacked a natural expressive face cared more about others than most people I'd met. He caught me staring and I couldn't explain myself. Are you really going to interview homeless people about whether they've seen anything strange while wearing that? I asked. He glanced down, a crease of confusion on his normally placid face. What's wrong with my suit? I felt as if it would be too much effort to explain it to him. We started off to conduct our interviews, but I'd made Nick stay in the car. I bought some coffee and some sandwiches to hand out while I asked questions. I learned a few smokes also helped getting people to talk. I listened patiently, hoping to hear anything interesting. I quickly found out this process was nerve-wracking. Nick needed to come in and rescue me from awkward situations when I started talking to someone who clearly was on the streets due to mental illness or drug abuse. I didn't find them dangerous, but when they started ranting about the government stealing their blood and thoughts, I felt my shoulders tense. By the end of the day, I felt exhausted, and without having found anything worthwhile. Nick and I parked the car near a park and got out to stretch our legs and also look over our notes. What do we know so far? I asked him. I was eating a leftover sandwich as my dinner. Nick refused one. I have yet to see him eat or drink anything. Did he even need to eat or drink? Pin that as a mystery to solve later. He opened his small notebook and I noticed it was a different color than the one he had when we first met. Each man was taken from different locations as far as we can tell. So far, all 8 men were taken without anyone noticing, and their last known locations are foggy at best. All the events we gathered today do not match any supernatural creature I am aware of, nor does the manner of death match any creatures. Nick responded as he looked over his notes. So, we got nothing, I said with a sigh. I don't believe so. We have nothing we can make sense of so far. Efforts are never wasted. They'll prove useful, even if it means we just have to wait for results. I wish I could be as forward-thinking as Nicky was. I saw our entire day as a waste, and he thought of it as time put towards results. I tossed my sandwich wrapper in the trash while wondering what to do next. So, we're going to do what? Camp out and watch some random homeless people meet up? It was starting to get dark, and I didn't know if we planned on staying in the city overnight. If we were going to keep an eye on some hotspots waiting for some monster to appear, we would need more manpower, or to get extremely lucky. Nick was looking through his notebook in the fading light, trying to find something. After he spotted what he wanted, he snapped shut his small notebook to focus his attention back onto me. The one spot is near a bridge, or rather a tunnel. If there is a grocery store nearby, we need to purchase some pickled eggs. I believe there is someone else we can ask. Huh? Without explaining himself further, we got into the car ready to go. Nick was the expert on these things after all. I looked up some directions, and a short trip later we were on our way towards a bridge with 2 massive jars of pickled eggs. I still didn't understand what was going on as I followed behind Nick, carrying one bag of the eggs while Nick had the other. Under the bridge was a pedestrian tunnel and a bike path. Above it was an ancient-looking set of railroad tracks that saw very limited use. Dim yellow lights lined the tunnel. Nick put an arm out to stop me from walking too close to the tunnel's entrance. Once he knew I would stay put, he placed a jar of eggs in front of the entrance. Then he walked back over to where I was standing as each light inside the tunnel started to go out. one by one, until the entire entrance was pitch black. Not even the surrounding light from the park we stood inside leaked into the darkness. I waited, with fear starting to seep into my stomach. Anything could happen. I trusted Nick, but he was a bit clueless at times. I wasn't exactly safe if our guest acted in a way he didn't expect. I waited, and then I started to hear the wind. It took me a few seconds to realize that was not the wind blowing through the tunnel. It sounded too rhythmic, almost like breathing. And it was getting closer. I should have bought a gun after getting involved with these jobs. If I lived, I swore I would get one as fast as possible. Fear started to show on my face, but Nick remained as calm as ever. The breathing sounds got louder and louder until finally something appeared from the tunnel. It was a finger. A finger so massive it barely fit through the entrance. It was twisted and gray, tipped with a long claw of a nail. Using a chipped nail, it brought the jar of pickled eggs into the darkness. Some wet sounds came until something else peeked from that dark tunnel. An eye. Looks like our heroes find themselves in a bit of a pickle. Let's find out exactly how they get out of it, with the second part starting now. Enjoy. It blinked as it judged us. Then it moved and the other eye took its place. The face behind the tunnel was so massive both eyes could not fit behind the entrance at the same time. That didn't make any sense. Besides, the tunnel was filled with bricks and earth. This thing, whatever it was, simply could not be inside the tunnel based on the massive scale of the few features I did see.
What do we have here? An odd pair, to be sure.
The voice was low and booming. I smelled putrid breath as it spoke, and I forced myself not to react.
An unfinished stone, and a human. No, not just a human. One that is also unfinished. A human that can never fully be.
I felt rage replace my fear of this creature. Took one look at me and saw something I desperately tried to hide and refused to talk about unless absolutely necessary. I was ready to try and kill this thing with my bare hands, but Nick stopped the both of us. Without his face changing, he grabbed the back of my shirt to drag me back when I wasn't even aware I had taken a step forward, ready for a fight.
Don't listen to it. It's only trying to get you worked up. It's in their nature.
He said, but it didn't help me calm down.
What he said, half rock and half human, they're only words.
The creature spoke with a cruel laugh afterwards. Nick, can I borrow your sword? I asked loud enough for the tunnel beast to hear. Nick's sword was invisible, but I knew it was there. He wouldn't go on a case trying to find a monster unarmed.
Skyler, please don't kill the bridge troll.
Nick replied in such a matter-of-fact tone it snapped me from my fighting mood. I looked from him to the dark tunnel with only one eye staring back. This massive thing was a troll? It was under a bridge, so that was understandable. I crossed my arms, not happy about not being able to do anything, but I let Nick speak.
We are looking for the one killing homeless men in this city, one of which may have been taken from this park. I was hoping you saw something.
Nick said and gestured towards the bag containing the other jar of eggs in my hand.
I may have, but who cares? They're just trash. Not worth the time. At least their death provided some creature some fun.
I felt my neck get hot and wanted to smash the jar of eggs. I don't know if this thing was just saying things to piss us off or if it really thought like this. If my sister didn't take me in after my parents kicked me out, I might have ended up like one of these men, only much worse. We both worked ourselves down to the bone to pay for rent and have enough to eat. We got lucky. The men who were killed could be on the streets for all sorts of reasons they couldn't control. I was not going to stand and listen to this thing insult 8 people who died through no fault of their own. Nick was also offended. Because of his lack of expression, I didn't know it until he drew his sword. the delicate thing making a musical sound as it appeared. Holding it out, he stared at the tunnel with his eyes blank and his hand steady.
If that's the truth, then the same goes for yourself. If those men are trash only worth entertainment and death, then a troll no one cares for can provide the same.
We all fell silent. I could feel the air pressing around my shoulders, and it suddenly felt hotter than before. It was impossible to read Nick's intentions. I honestly thought he was going to go through with killing it, until he placed his sword back into the scabbard, and it faded from sight.
I brought you eggs in exchange for information. I am looking for the killer of these men. They are not trash. They're people. You are a troll with a terrible personality, but I can still respect you enough to make a basic exchange.
I felt some tension fade at his words. At least these two weren't going to get into a fight. I wasn't expecting the troll to be touched by his words, but rather only thankful he was still alive. When it spoke again, the tone was much softer.
I have nothing better to do all day but watch the ones in the park. It's like bird watching for humans. I saw a man get forced inside a white van and not return. I am unaware of it as one of your victims, but it is the only strange event I have seen with these homeless humans. Some just stop showing up for unknown reasons,
the troll admitted. I wasn't expecting actual useful information from this creature. This didn't fully answer our question, but it did open up our investigation to other ideas. Was someone kidnapping men to feed to a pet monster? Or was there a human-looking beast out there, driving around, picking up victims no one would miss? My train of thought was derailed when the troll spoke again, eyes squinting as if it was smiling.
I spotted this van for a few nights in a row before it took the man. I've seen it again, so maybe it may strike again soon. Give me the other jar, and I'll tell you what took these men.
I looked over to Nick, heart beating. Even after everything, I wanted to trust this monster. Then again, with the troll's track record, I wasn't sure if it was telling the truth or just messing with us. Nick took the bag and walked over to set the jar of eggs within reach. Thankfully, the troll wasn't just trying to lure Nick in to attack him. The eye disappeared, and the fingernail took the jar. We waited, and were positive the creature left, before the voice came faintly, as if from a distance.
The one who took them is the most frightening monster on this planet, one not bound by rule, and the one that has done the most amount of destruction throughout the ages.
The voice was echoing through the tunnel as the light started to flicker back on. We both stared down into the now empty tunnel, wondering about how the parting words of the troll. I didn't understand what kind of creature it was talking about, so I looked over to Nick. "Do you know what it meant?" I asked.
"I have no idea,"
he said without a hint of shame. In the end, we needed to camp out and watch the park all night. At least we knew we would be in the right area. If the troll wasn't lying to us, the white van could come prowling down the road looking for a new target. We sat down on a park bench watching the street. Nick was flipping through his notebooks, looking for any sort of clue on what monster we could be facing. Beside ourselves, two men camped out, huddled in piles of dirty blankets a bit away but within eyesight. We could watch them and the road at the same time. The night was cool because it was still spring. I should have brought a jacket. After a while, Nick gave up looking for any hints within his notebook. He had a hint of frustration on his face.
"I must apologize for my overreaction earlier,"
Nick said, making me raise an eyebrow. That was an overreaction? I gave him a smile, not knowing if he could tell I was teasing him. The dark park made me feel uneasy. An unknown threat was out there and might not take our meddling lightly. Every time I went on a case with Nick, I was risking my life. Overall, I felt as if it was worth it. I would never reach my goals working the normal jobs that came along. Yawning, I was a little surprised I could be tired and nervous at the same time. Looking back on the day, I realized I really didn't help on the case at all. I slouched down on the bench, feeling the same sense of frustration start up in my stomach. Nick noticed my mood, but didn't look as if he knew how to ask about what was wrong. I don't feel helpful, I said. What happened to your old partner? Did they get a transfer or something? Honestly, Nick hadn't told me much. I really hit the ground running accepting things lurked in the night. I didn't have a lot of information and figured it was because it was all this secret government stuff.
She died.
I sat up at his answer. His voice didn't change, but I sensed a shift in his mood. Nick wasn't looking in my direction, or rather, he couldn't bring himself to. Remembering his pink cell phone with all the charms, I felt my arms prickle. It was a phone that should belong to a girl. A memento from his last partner? How recent did this happen? I didn't feel right to ask. I'm sorry, I said in an awkward tone. He didn't react, just kept staring forwards. Not only was I not helping and just here for a payout, I brought up something uncomfortable. Just as I started feeling awful about sitting next to the agent, he rescued the conversation.
I'm glad you're here. I do not wish to be alone so soon after what happened. All the other partner options are not ideal. Most would just use me for what I am instead of trying to strike up a conversation. I am not experienced in dealing with others, so I feel as if I am making things difficult for you,
Nick said as he finally looked over. It's scary how nice you are. Confusion fluttered over his face, but he accepted my answer. I wanted to know what Nick was. The troll called him an unfinished stone. It really didn't feel as if I could ask him about it after he mentioned how others would use him for simply being whatever he was. In the future, I would find the right time to sneak the question in. Because I was looking in his direction, I noticed some movement over his shoulder. On reflex, I grabbed him and pulled Nick off the bench, just as a clawed hand darted out from the bush behind the wooden bench. Out of the darkness sprang a lanky, hissing creature, a body long and deformed. Milky white eyes glared at us as its mouth opened nearly ear to ear. The skin was a sickly gray, and I could see the creature's ribs. One swat of those claws could easily cut us in half. What the hell is that? I shouted, startled at the sudden appearance.
A minor creature, not much of a threat,
Nick replied with his hand hovering at his waist. I waited for one of us to break the stalemate. With his sword, Nick could easily take out this thing. However, he was hesitating. The problem was his sword was too powerful. It would dig into the ground and create all sorts of damage wherever he directed his attack. We didn't know if anyone else was camping out in the small area of trees. Since earlier today, we were told people often did so instead of sleeping out in the open. One swing of the sword could kill this monster, but also anyone else unlucky enough to be in its way. The creature acted first. It launched itself off the park bench towards Nick's face with claws out. I was terrified, but still moved. I slammed my shoulder into this creature, knocking it off course into the ground. I felt bones crack against my shoulder. It scrambled on the ground, making yowling noises, trying to get back into position to attack again. It arched its back on all fours, ready to bite our faces off, when movement from Nick made it pause. Out from a suit pocket, he pulled out a bag of beef jerky. I stared at him, mouth slightly open. He was appeasing a twisted creature made of nightmares with a snack. Tossing it in front of us, the thing darted over, taking the bag in its wide mouth. Without taking its eyes off us, it backed up under the bench. Somehow, the thing sank into the dark shadow of the bench, leaving us alone. What the fuck? I whispered mostly to myself.
I believe the troll sent this creature after us as amusement. It may be watching right now, having a laugh. The thing that attacked us is part of a race that hates agents almost as much as it likes snacks.
Nick let his hands drop now that the threat had passed. I looked over my shoulder towards the tunnel. The lights were still on, but I believe the troll was watching, and I hoped it was disappointed in the outcome. After I heard tires screeching, I knew the troll had won in the end. It distracted us from our job. I cursed again and started off as fast as my legs would carry me towards the road. The two homeless men were still sleeping and somehow not woken up by the brief fight. If the tires belonged to the white van, we wanted to find out if it could have taken someone else we didn't see before. I ran right into the middle of the empty street, looking around, trying to see what car made the noise. My heart sank when I spotted the back of a white van peeling off down the straight road. we didn't have any means of going after it. Turns out, we didn't need to go after it. Nick ran so fast he was unable to stop in the middle of the street. He skidded to a stop and needed to double back to where I stood. If the situation wasn't so dire, the sight would have been comical. Again, his hand went to his waist, and this time he drew his sword. In one lightning-fast movement, he drew the blade and sent a thin shockwave of destruction down the street towards the van. A burst of wind blasted my face, and I needed to raise my hand so I didn't see the impact. But I heard it. A terrible crashing sound came from down the street. It was so loud it hurt my ears even from a distance. When I lowered my hands, my jaw dropped. Nick had cut the van in half, each side falling away from each other. One crashed into a parked car, the other went forward a few more feet just to slam into a telephone pole. The side that hit the car tipped over on its side, revealing the inside of the van, where a man dressed in rags lay limp. He was tied down to the van wall, ensuring he was the only one safe from the crash. I ran behind Nick, who kept running to go check on the driver. Along the road was debris scattered from the now split van. At first I assumed they were tools, so I concerned myself with getting the man from the destroyed van. When I knew he was knocked out and not dead, I started to look around, unsure of what I was seeing. Saws, hammers, drills, bear traps, and more littered the road. Along the walls were more dangerous-looking objects. I finally clued into what I was seeing after I spotted the stains on some of the tools. The van was a place of torture. All these instruments were chosen to inflict harm on a human. I thought back to the bodies of the 8 men, and everything made sense. We were never looking for a supernatural creature. I was careful as I got the man untied and got him onto the road. Nick pulled the driver from the front of the crashed van, face bloody and nose broken. He might have been saved by the airbag. Sirens started to come closer as dogs barked around us. The crash attracted a lot of attention, and I wasn't sure I knew how to explain it to the police.
The driver is alive. I am not certain if he'll make it, though.
Getting down on our level, Nick took off his jacket to let the man we rescued use it as a pillow until an ambulance arrived. I looked around, still unable to believe this entire time we were looking for a serial killer. The state of the bodies looked beyond anything a human could do. I now know that was foolish. Back then in my mind, crimes like this only happened in the podcasts I listened to while staking out a cheating husband. It never felt real, and being suddenly forced to face the horrors of my own kind made me feel in a way I couldn't describe. How are we going to explain all this? I asked and looked around at the sudden chaos. The same blank expression on his face was my response. Just as flashing lights started to color the street, Nick shrugged.
I have no idea.
That did not make me feel better in the slightest. I was grilled for hours over what happened. They separated us. I was smart enough not to say a word, no matter how stressed I felt. After 6 hours, a female lawyer came into the room. She simply gave the detective a sheet of paper. Then I was free to go. I sent Nick a text the moment I got my phone back. His response was, "I'll talk to you later." I waited 2 more days until he sent me a message, asking if I could meet him in the park near my office. I wasn't busy, so I went, wanting to know the outcome of our case. He looked terrible, as if he hadn't slept since the last time we saw each other. He still gave me a wave when I walked over to sit on the bench beside him. He explained the corporation cleaned up the mess, making it look like a regular accident. The man who was driving was in fact the killer. Because he used different tools and even some jaws of dead animals, the bodies looked as if they were torn apart by something not human. Nick fiddled with his phone, and a few seconds later, mine pinged. A payment of $1,000 was deposited in my account. I honestly forgot about the money because of everything that had happened.
This was all that was left over from doing a big cover-up. I'm sorry, it's barely anything. Because the case had a human culprit, my job didn't want to pay anything. I put my foot down, saying you should get something for your time.
I stared at my phone knowing this was pretty good for a single day of working. Nick was acting as if that amount was chump change, though. He did mention bigger cases get paid out more, but I had no clue just how much more that was. Nick, you know $1,000 is a pretty decent amount of money, right? Some people don't even earn that in a week. He stared at me, that blank expression saying something I didn't want to read into. This dang bastard was probably richer than I would ever be in my life, because he wasn't human and could fight monsters for a massive profit, all the while being unaware of that fact. If he wasn't so nice, I would be upset. His phone rang. He answered in a language I had never heard before. Soon he hung up and apologized, saying he needed to leave for work again. Call me anytime you have a job you think I can handle. I might be useful for something someday. I let out a chuckle and thought I spotted a hint of a smile on his face. He promised if anything came up, he would send me a message. Soon, I was left alone in the park on a beautiful sunny day, but unable to really appreciate the weather. I kept staring down at the new payment, feeling a dark pit in my stomach. The images of those 8 men came flashing into my mind. Thanks to Nick, they got their names back. And because he cared, there would be no more victims from their killer. I knew it wasn't enough. Things like this would keep happening. Yet again, I felt useless. I searched for the website of the shelter where we asked for names a few days ago. Finding the right page, I could easily donate my 1 day of work to the shelter. I knew it didn't really solve the overall problem, but at least it might help a few people for a little while. I stared at the charity receipt email, telling myself the reason for the donation was for tax deductions at the end of the year. I placed my phone back into my pocket to get ready to head back to my little office. I needed to learn more about supernatural creatures and become a better contract worker for the bigger jobs. After I make sure my sister was set, I had some ideas for the funds I would be risking my life for. It might not do much overall, but as Nick has said, efforts are never really wasted. I'm sure everything will be perfect and happy for Skyler and Nick moving forward. But in the meantime, you can handle another story, right?